Do you have faith in the power of technology to make the world a better place? Or are you of the mind that it's technology that is sending our world spinning out of control? Or do you think it's specifically the internet that is spinning us out of control? Would you like to see a less networked world where the internet is severely dialed back or just shut down and we have to rely on older or alternative modes of communication? The story I'm looking at in this episode pokes at a few of these questions. I think if these things are on your mind, this is a story for you. It's also an extremely, I would say, hardcore story. It's Quantum Genocide. The author is Chen Qiufan I. He's on this episode. He's the interview guest. You'll be hearing me talk to him after the TrChFic news, which also has a second person. You'll be hearing from Meng Jin, who was one of two interns that I took on to do some bits and bobs to help the podcast over February. Now, I'm not sure, you might also be hearing another joint contributor to the show. There's a cricket singing in this room right now because I have a hedgehog. We feed the hedgehog bugs, and the bugs we have right now, some of them are crickets, and we have a variety of crickets that are able to sing their song by rubbing their wing casings or whatever it is together. It kind of reminds me when I used to work in Shanghai High School's, the high school of Shanghai High School's library. The librarian once brought in his, I don't know if it was a fighting cricket or a pet cricket. Needless to say, he was a Shanghainese shushu, and he liked his bugs. I'm a bit more ambivalent about my bugs. I don't mind feeding them to the hedgehog. Anyway, let's get our mind off hedgehogs and back onto Chinese literature. First with the TrChFic news, and then we'll be looking at the lovely, wonderful world of Quantum Genocide. So through February, I've had two amazing interns, I should say, helping out on the show. And one of them, Meng Jin, is here to help me read the news items, which she sourced and wrote up all herself. So automatically applause for that. But now please also lend your applause as I pass the first news item to Meng Jin. What's up first?
Thank you. So the first news item will be a reading material, and this is an analysis by LSE China Foresight. It is a think tank and focusing on China's issues. And the title of this reading will be How Does Chinese Sci-Fi Tell China's Global Strategy? And it discusses 3 points, and one point is really interesting. It says past optimism. Have you heard of this?
I haven't. Please introduce this to me.
Yeah, so you can separate the word into 2 parts. So one is pessimistic and another is optimistic. So the authors that thinks that if you look closely in Chinese people, you will find that they are optimistic about their country's achievement, but they are pessimistic about its future. So that's quite contradictory for them. And if listeners are interested, they can explore more to find out.
Totally. It feels very sort of relevant to Chinese sci-fi, the ideas of pessimism and optimism. I think anyone who's listened to the show on episodes where I've looked at like Liu Cixin's Three-Body Problem or Han Song's books or stuff by younger authors, I'm always curious in what versions of optimism and pessimism about the future I'm seeing. And this report is drawing on sort of big name authors like that in their writing and using it for this sort of political analysis. So if that sounds up your alley, this thing is free to read as a PDF and the link is right there in the show notes. So thanks for that, Meng Jin. I'll handle this next news item. It's also an item that's free to read online. It's the preface to Matt Turner's translation of Lu Xun's Ye Zao, which he, in this translation, titled Weeds. And if that rings a bell for long-term TrChFic listeners, it's because quite early in the show's history, I interviewed Matt about Weeds, his translation. And it's quite interesting that this has gone online now, because another translation of Ye Zao was published recently, I believe through an academic press, which puts the grand total of English translations of Lu Xun's work up to 3, I think. There was an original Wild Grass by, I think, Gladys Yang and Yang Xianyi, or I think both of them, maybe one of the two. Then we had Matt Turner's Weeds, and now we've got another Wild Grass. So interesting times for Lu Xun long after he's left us, and Matt shares his thoughts on that and translating. And like I said, up to read. Links there in the show notes. Go check it out. So that's our second news item. Third one, I'll pass you all back into the capable hands of Meng-Jin. What is our third item?
Thank you, Anx. And the third item is a podcast by Renmei, and this is a lecture by Joe Mingford, which is a big name in the academia, and he will talk about 4 classics of Chinese literature. So I first glimpse, by looking at this title, I think if he will mention 三国演义、水浒传、红楼梦, and
西游记, did you say that?
Thank you. And 西游记. And I think, and then when I read the article, it actually talks about 易经、道德经、红楼梦. And the first 2 are quite different from my imagination. So if you are interested in, you can look at how he interprets these 3 stories. And also he says he will talk about Chinese literature. And actually in this podcast, we will also hear a collection of Chinese poems. So whether poems can be classified as literature, I will leave a question mark. You can also see how Chinese people think. And also you can discover China's ancient civilization through this talk. So if you are interested, just go for it.
Indeed. With podcasts, always just go for it. So yeah, you pointed out something a little funny, that in the description of the episode, it's pitched as 4 great works, but one of our 4 in the list is just a selection of most famous Chinese poems. And there's another slightly amusing contradiction in that the podcast that is hosting to this episode, the Ramsey Center podcast, describes itself as being about delving into the great conversation of Western civilization. But obviously in this episode, the topic is something more like Chinese civilization. But whatever, it's still a great interview, I'm sure. Go check it out. Okay, next news item. I'm handling this one. It's not ancient at all. It's all modern stuff. It's another thing you can read. It's the new column from former show guest, and I would hope friend of the show, Emily Xueni Jin, talking about the development of sci-fi in China, sort of in the light of a new domestic TV adaptation of The Three Body Problem, which has just come out. But Emily's not really got the spotlight on Liu Cixin and his hard sci-fi in this article. It's about how the new younger generation of authors, I guess the millennials and maybe even some Zoomers, are sort of domesticating the genre by bringing in Chinese traditions and historical stories, cultural heritage, basically, rather than having the more sort of American influenced hard sci-fi. So yeah, if that sounds interesting to you, links right there in the show notes. Do check it out. And for one more thing you can check out, got our final news item here. Pass you all back to Meng-Jin. Meng-Jin, what is this last little item we've got in our news segment?
There will be a new translated literature coming soon on 27th February, which is called Cherries on a Pomegranate Tree. Actually, I think when this episode is released, this book will be available for all of you to buy. And this book is written by Li Er and translated by Dave Hansen. And there will also be an online book club meeting. And if you are interested, you can join this meeting to see.
Absolutely. And there's a very good reason to do that. I'm the host. Listeners, you may have heard me promoting Cinemas Books Book Club meetings before. Often for this partly selfish reason that I'll be hosting it, but also because these are interesting books and these are always interesting conversations. And if you're listening far ahead in the future, in 2024 or even any time after March in 2023, don't worry, these events aren't lost to time. Cinemas Books put them all up onto YouTube. So they're there for you to watch or to listen to if you want to run the tab in the background. It's all there for free. That's been a little bit of a theme in this new segment. Everything's up there for you to enjoy for free. So big thank you to Meng-Jin. Thanks for being my co-newsreader today. It's been great having you and Shuhan, the other intern, on the podcast. Big round of applause. Let's see if my microphone picks this up. There we go.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
That's all right. So on the show, we have Chen Qiufan, aka Stanley Chan, aka Stan, back here for the second time. It was literally years ago you were last here to talk about Waste Tide. So it's wonderful to have you back. It was 2019 last time you were here. So what have you been up to since 2019?
Right. So actually, last time we met in Manchester was the final trip before pandemic for me. So afterward, everyone knows what happened, and I spent 2 years in China. So basically just writing and travel domestically. And I finished the book, actually two books. One is AI 2041, and the other one is Net Zero China. It's a book talking about carbon neutrality for kids. So both of them came out last year. So and the English version of AI 2041 came out in 2021 September. So last year I started to travel internationally. I do some residency programs in US and also in Europe, in Switzerland. And so basically just doing this kind of world tour. So now I'm in US. I'll be the visiting scholar for Macmillan Center at Yale University this year. So also I'm working on my next novel. It's a sequel to Waste Tide. So I'm in the middle of it. So yeah, I am pretty excited about it. So a lot of things happen. I mean, yeah, the whole world changed. So it's quite crazy, like stranger than fiction, I have to say.
Yeah, totally. I feel, at least here in the bit of England I'm in, 2023 doesn't feel as strange as 2020 did, but it still feels pretty strange. And it feels like
Yep.
some of the things aren't ongoing changes. They're now just part of everyday reality. So I almost have to remind myself how strange they are, that it's not, that it's all these strange things have been normalized. Anyway, you mentioned that one of the books that's come out since then is AI 2041. And in this episode, or this interview, this episode, we're looking at one of the stories from AI 2041. But I guess for listeners who haven't heard about this book before, we should clear up what it is, because it's a book of kind of 50% stories, 50% essays, and it's only maybe 50% by you. So can you explain that one for listeners who are feeling confused?
Sure. It's an unconventional collaboration between me and Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, an investor, entrepreneur, and also AI scientist. So we both worked for Google back in the day. So we have very slightly overlapping time. So 2 years ago, actually it was 3 years ago. Sorry, the time sense is getting a little bit weird. Before the pandemic, he reached out to me and brought out this idea, like how about we collaborate on the book about AI. Like I'm on charge of the science fictional part, and he will explain all these technologies in the story. So it could be something in between. It's like a mix of format or genre. So I think this is quite fascinating idea. So we spend a lot of time working on it, like before and after, or during the pandemic. So it took us almost 2 years to finish the book. And there are 10 stories set in 10 different cities all around the world. Each one of those like discuss a very specific scenario, like AI on education, on entertainment, on like pandemic, future wars and aging society, etc., etc. So each one of the stories attached with one essay from Dr. Kai-Fu Lee to explain a little bit more about like where we are at right now and how this technology gonna evolve over the next 2 decades, and how it brought us like individually or on the society level, the challenge and the potential, and how we gonna embrace it in a positive way. So it was set on a very bright and positive tone. So that's intentionally, and I'm very happy this book got quite a lot of like recognition and even some awards last year from Germany Business Book of the Year. So I think this is something very encouraging, because a lot of like teachers in the university or even high school, they use this book as a reading materials to teach the kids, the younger, to learn how to think about in a more reflexible way the relationship between human beings with the technology and how complicated this kind of relationship could be. So I think this is something definitely we'd love to see. And of course, we can discuss more later about how this kind of collaboration happened and maybe there are some tensions as well.
For sure, yes. As you were answering that question, I was thinking of my own questions for you, but most of those questions are ones I'll be asking you later. So I'm going to try to control myself and follow the plan. But I thought I would lead into talking about our choice of story for this episode by picking up what you said about the book being optimistic, because yeah, it was very noticeable for me reading it that Kai-Fu Lee clearly has quite a lot of faith that AI technologies are going to one, make the world of business run a lot more smoother and have a lot more capabilities, but also have positive effects for society. He certainly talks a bit about some of the risks, but it really feels like a pro AI book. And your short stories in the book are, I would say, not as dark as the other Chen Qiufan stories I've read. They're maybe a bit more ambiguous than the essays, but there was only really one that I thought was, whoa, this is a dark, scary story, and it's the one with the dark, scary title, Quantum Genocide. So yeah. I don't know if that is a direct translation of the Chinese title, but it's a really striking title for a story. And the story itself is, I think intense is a great word. As I was reading it, I felt on one hand it did remind me of some of the stuff from Waste Tide, the very sort of chaotic, out of control situation where things you can't see, invisible technology is sort of pulling the strings. But it also reminded me of kind of like an American thriller, like a political thriller, technology thriller kind of movie. It had a blockbuster feel as well, which was an interesting reading experience, because I usually don't read like thriller, page turner thriller novels, but I like it when a story has my attention, and this one really did. So that's basically why I've picked this one. The fact it's exciting, it's dark, and to me it was a little bit of an outlier. I don't know if you intended it to be that way. I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, of course. Interestingly, like each person, they have their own pick from the book. Like those who like parents, they have kids, they prefer the twin sparrows because talk about education. And maybe some youngers, they love My Hunting Idol because talk about virtual idols and digital human and metaverse, everything. So I think this like I did on purpose. So I try to expand the audience. And this one, Quantum Genocide, we did it intentionally to be a like Hollywood blockbuster like kind of story. And there's action, there's thriller, and there's a lot of like explosion, things like that, almost like a Michael Bay movie. So I think and Kevin loved that. So because we discussed about it, so he watched a lot of like Hollywood movies and he know like what it's gonna be like, and so we discussed a lot around this concepts. So because you can see there's a lot of technology in the story, but also I want to explore like they're not really villain, but there's a mad scientist, and of course there's backstory about his traumas, and like everyone has a trauma basically in the story, and people try to save the world and from different ways. So we can see all these kind of interconnectivities. So pushing the world to, I don't know, to a brighter or to a darker future. So that's I think I left the ending quite kind of open to the readers so they can imagine what's happened next. Maybe just like The Last of Us, like a post apocalypse world, or maybe there's totally a different kind of civilization. So this is, yeah, so we actually plan to write a story in that kind of different town.
Before we get totally sucked into this story, I would like to say, yeah, I had some other personal, some definitely I could say which stories I personally connected to more than others, and I did think Twin Sparrows was a really interesting one. Maybe because I spent a few years working as a teacher with kids who were
Oh yeah.
that age. Yeah. Don't think I was using any very advanced technology, but I was definitely using some technology that didn't exist when I was a school kid. So yeah, I mean that is a whole other interesting conversation, but probably for a different podcast because we're doing Quantum Genocide. So
Right.
I think an interesting thing to mention is that the story demonstrates partly AI technologies, but the word quantum is in there because it's also a little bit about quantum computing. And I thought describing how the technology works in the story could be a good way to also just explain a little bit about the plot and the characters for listeners who haven't read this one yet, since they're going to need to know a bit about that before we get into the really deep and crazy and strange ideas. So are you okay with spoilers, or should we keep some secrets?
No problem, please.
Okay, right. So I'll try and explain the basics, and then if you feel I've missed anything, we can fill in some gaps. So we start off in Greenland, where some hackers are in Greenland and they're trying to uncover like a legendary stash of bitcoins. And
Right.
just as they're about to grab that digital currency, it's snatched away. And then I guess fast forward, a attack comes out of no. I'm doing a bad job summarizing this. Essentially, in a nutshell, I can do it in a nutshell. Some kind of mysterious terrorist, or I don't know. I guess we don't know if they're terrorists. Someone is orchestrating clouds of smart drones to wipe out what appears to be some of the richest people in the world. I believe it's called the what is it? The something blacklist. There's a blacklist of people who are getting wiped out by killer drones, and it transpires a scientist who invented a new kind of quantum computing is he had at first we think he's trying to stop all the sort of big CEOs and scientists who are trying to accelerate technology. So we have an impression that he's an eco-terrorist, but at the story's climax, it transpires his big plan is to sort of cripple the internet, to sort of put a pause on the march forward of technology, to give nature time to recover. And trying to stop him, we have, so this guy's name is Mark Rousseau, and trying to stop him, we have Robin, a hacker who has teamed up with a guy called Xavier, who is, if I remember right, he's a I can't remember his profession, but he's sort of representing Europe in the efforts to stop the attacks. That was a very messy summary, but do you think there's anything else we should clue the listeners in on?
No. I think you cover like most of the major points, and I think it looks like a puzzle game. So because there are so many different technologies from different aspects, and they're just like interwoven together, just like what I quote at the very beginning, like everything is uh, connected. So this is basically what I want to try to talk about. Like is like the complexity, is like the butterfly effects, and this is something driving us the whole civilization towards some certain direction, like what we're talking about right now, like ChatGPT definitely will be part of it. So yeah, so basically, um, there's quantum computation for sure, and there's climate change, and also all those like drone swarm, autonomous weapon and manufacturing, and also like using AI technology to how to say like bring the death back to life. Like there are many plots like that. So there are like some plot devices with different kind of technology, but ultimately I want to discuss is about the human condition. Like we're too arrogant right now, and is to me it's like almost we're at the cliff of everything. So it's gonna be happen, just a matter of time.
Right. Yeah. I think it's relevant then that our eco-terrorist figure Rousseau is going after what people who he calls accelerationists. So I learned in my last job on a pharmaceutical industry trade magazine, that people in the world of business, at least in the English language world, really love the word accelerate. There's I guess the concept when someone uses a word like that is that when new technologies arrive, they will be able to speed up certain processes, and if you speed up process X, it has a knock-on effect, and you have this multiplying effect where what's the word, an exponent. So you have opportunities for exponential improvement. Things move exponentially faster. You can produce goods, exponentially more goods, exponentially faster. And of course, the problem is, what if technology really can move us forward exponentially? One, what if it goes faster than we can keep up? And then two, what about the fact that we live on a finite planet that can't really survive rapid infinite human expansion? And it is interesting because in the book, Kai-Fu Lee is quite often talking about technologies that, if they do as we hope they do, they could multiply the speed and effectiveness at which we can do things. Like, for one example, I have one or two friends right now who are working on job applications. One was asked to, as part of a test for an application, he had to sort of design an event or an exhibit to do with, well, I won't say what it is. I should keep his secrets. But he needed to visualize or demonstrate an event. So he used DALL-E, the AI art generator, to create a visualization of the event. And he was shocked because with a very small amount of nudging, it was able to create exactly the image in his mind. And
right.
I suppose the crazy thing is, it feels like a lot of these technologies have come from nowhere. And I've learned from asking people, sometimes the idea of acceleration is just an idea. I think Kai-Fu Lee goes into the fact that although the power of technology will multiply in an exponential way, so will the difficulties of problems it will solve. But I think in your story you demonstrated how just one small invention, like a swarm of combat drones that are able to coordinate, really could change things. And even there's the possibility that these technologies already exist, and all that needs to be done is for someone to do something crazy with them. Like, I think drone technology is quite mad, and we're quite lucky that drones haven't done anything really terrifying yet. I suppose that depends where you are. If you're in an area where drones, American drones are bombing your country, they are scary. But yeah, I think it did underline how close we are to a world that is hard to even imagine. Yeah, that's a real word salad. But yeah, I think I was also going to say, just to round this point off, a lot of sci-fi out there, including maybe some of your stories in AI 2041, take one piece of technology or one concept and they explore it. But it's totally right. Quantum Genocide is really looking at a few things at once. The two big ones, that, like we said, are quantum computing and autonomous weapons. But really, it's the whole storm of all these things interacting that is the real theme, which makes it a little different, I think, from some of the other stories. Gives it a broader canvas.
Right. So because I see it as it's a complex of all different kind of technologies, so they will co-evolve in a way that even beyond our comprehension. So I think this is what's happening now, and I think of course accelerationism or accelerationist, like it's not like a very on the surface like label that everyone will put it on themselves, but I can see and I can feel this kind of vibe among all of these tech entrepreneurs, investors, and even the government for sure. And in China, we have a very specific term to describe this kind of people. It's called industrial party.
Oh yeah, I've heard about this.
Yeah, 工业党. So people who hold on this belief very firmly. They believe in the speed, efficiency, and scalability. So they believe in this massive scale of manufacturing and change a lot of things. So we just need to do it as fast enough. We just need to build things. We just need to put in more money, and we can solve a lot of problems. So this is how I feel the whole vibe in the atmosphere, and this is something where I try to attack from my own angle, because we can feel definitely this is not anything new. It's not from the socialism. It's from the capitalism. It's all about like exploitation. It's all about like extractionism. So because you need the human labor and you need maybe machine labor, and you need all this kind of resources from the nature and the planet for sure. So I think this is some very dangerous thought, like driving us like trapped in this accelerating loop. So it's kind of like extracting everything like out of the limit. So yeah, so I put it in the story. So talk about, oh, maybe there's in the future, like it's just like one man's band. Only one person, if he's rich enough, he's powerful enough, he can use the utilizing all this kind of technology, and he can evoke this like massive scale of terrorist attack against the whole human civilization. So this is push the limit to an extreme. So this is how science fiction usually do.
I think what you said, that most people in the world of most people in the world who concern themselves with like ideas about what's best for society wouldn't want to be anywhere near the label accelerationist or accelerationism. Right. I know I guess around 2016 that term got sort of tied up with, at least in the Western world, with alt-right, far-right accelerationism. But even before that, the political idea of accelerationism is just sort of make things go fast, push them to their extreme. And I guess it would often be like a far left or far right idea. So the far left idea would be something like push capitalism to a hard extreme, and then it will either collapse or it will break through to the next stage. And then maybe the far right idea is something similar, but much nastier. Whereas the business idea of accelerationism, I think you're right that there is no real complicated idea about what the end point or the goal is. It really just is go faster, unlock new levels of business development. And there's not much deep thinking about social, philosophical, or even just strange ideas. In my job on that business magazine, I had an interesting regular feature where I would ask people in cell and gene therapy to consider what automation could do. There was one where I tried to ask them to write something interesting, to submit some interesting writing on automation in the manufacturing of these kinds of medicine, and another where I asked them how they would try to bring down prices, because a big problem in cell and gene therapy is these things cost millions of dollars for one dose. So I wanted them to think about social or even political concepts outside of just science or business, and very few of them could do it. And the ones who could had quite simple ideas. Probably the most interesting thoughts were people were using the Ford motor car as a metaphor. So like how a more standardized manufacturing could bring down prices. So they used an interesting historical metaphor, but it's not a very deep idea. So I would agree that, yeah, the lack of thought in, I don't know, I think maybe
Lack of
I'm
imagination.
yeah, I think maybe I'm spoiled with my humanities education with an English degree, that some of the world of business seems very, very shallow. You kind of wish you could take some of these people and throw them into a philosophy class. That would
Right.
be preferable to sending drones after them to kill them.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of social philosophical strange concepts, were there any particular ideas that interested you most in exploring the technology or its consequences? Like Bitcoin is in there,
Yeah.
warfare. Like what things interested you, and what did you want to explore specifically?
Right. So philosophically, I actually quite fascinating about the idea of overfitting. So this is like a term in machine learning. So let me read a bit of this. Like overfitting is a common problem in machine learning and refers to a situation where a model fits the training data too closely and to the point that it starts to model the noise and randomness in the training data rather than underlying patterns that are expected to generalize the new unseen data. So this is something happen not only in machine, but only on human. So there's one very bizarre episode or syndrome. It's called apophenia. That means people see unexisted pattern from all this kind of data, or like you see dots on the wall and you can recognize the face, something like that. Very trippy experience, but it happens because it's like correlated, related to the way how we functioning in our brain. So basically, it's like a pattern recognition in an extreme way. So this is could be in AI, but also could be in human consciousness and behavior. So what we see here, the Marc Rousseau, as a scientist, he studied quantum physics and he started to change his mind. So that's a deeper level of the explanation. So he kind of like connect all this kind of factor together, and he thinks he see a deeper pattern of the correlation. So he blamed that the death of his wife and kid to this kind of accelerationist, which we couldn't say is wrong, but it's a way of overfitting like thinking. So this is happening right now as we like deploy more and more, like we use AI more and more, and also we try to train and teach people to behave it and think like machine. So I think this kind of overfitting phenomenon will occur uh, frequently and become something bigger. So so this is something I try to explore in the very blockbuster framework of storytelling.
Right. That is really interesting. I guess this isn't a deep thought, but you've reminded me an interesting point in the story. So Marc Rousseau's family, he lost his wife and his child to a huge I think is it a wildfire, basically a
Wildfire,
wildfire.
Yeah, North California,
North
like
California.
Paradise Time. Yeah.
Yeah. So this, I mean, already in the present day, I believe climate change is accelerating these wildfires, and California is one of the worst places for it. But obviously, clues in the title, this story is set in 2041. So I guess just a few years prior to 2041 in the story, these fires are even worse than they are now. I'm thinking about this. I've seen very little like written or film media that looks at these phenomena. The only other one I can think of is, I don't remember the name, but there's a film. It's written by the same guy that wrote the show True Detective, and it stars Jake Gyllenhaal. He's a policeman who's, the whole film is him on the phone with people out there in California, and while it's happening, a wildfire is engulfing the city. So that it's like a hell on earth situation, but he's just sat in his office. And I don't know, I feel like we really do need more fiction like that doesn't just turn its eyes away from these things. So, and I guess as well, this is, I mean, maybe says more about the things I read than what's out there, but I think this is the first story I read that like deals with Bitcoin. It was a really interesting exploration into like the history and the lore of Bitcoin. Was that stuff that you already knew about, or did you do research into the world of Bitcoin?
I'm not the early investor, but I have a lot of connection with the industry of Web3 and crypto. So I know some things, and I try to put it in a futuristic setting. So I think it could be very interesting because obviously quantum computation will change the game. Like the cryptonomic will be overthrown maybe overnight. So because we need to invent some new kind of way to protect all of our assets. And of course, I want to go back to the previous point, like when we talk about climate change, is related to carbon emission and also related to all the computation power we need. Like if we try to build up a faster computer, we need more electricity. And that means if we couldn't find a way like the clean energy or like a nuclear fusion or anything. So this is another way of accelerating the whole thing, right? So we do more calculation, we do more rendering, we do more like AI stuff. It's basically accelerating the whole climate change scenario. So this is another hidden layer of this kind of interconnectivity. And of course, I think with the Bitcoin here, we have a very interesting discussion with Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, like what should the price of one Bitcoin in the next 20 years? So we have a very strong, like, discussion, like we have different opinions. I think we make it in a very conservative way. So make it a point, like maybe, I don't know. I couldn't remember the actual number in the story. So, but we make a very linear and logical speculation how the price might go up to 2041. But I think maybe it's like exponentially, like it might go rocket high or it just crash overnight. It's all possible. So we just make a very conservative, I guess.
Yeah, that's I guess a funny thing about trying to make predictions and where technology is going. Some human technologies do have these exponential leaps forward, and others don't. They maybe freeze, or they develop more gradually. I'm failing to think of any genius examples, but I think, yeah, if a technology does leap forward exponentially, it's hard to predict where it's going. I guess you see that in older sci-fi films, like Blade Runner has flying cars. We're nowhere near flying cars, but we have all sorts of other technology that Ridley Scott or Philip K. Dick couldn't have dreamed of. It must have been a bit daunting, right? Trying to essentially write all this fiction pegged to a specific year that's trying to realistically. Do you feel nervous about that, or?
Sure. In my own writing, I'll never like attach to a very specific year because I think it's a trap. You ultimately you messed up for sure. But this one, because we talked to the publisher and we think 20 years is a reasonable period of time to make all this kind of speculation. So like 50-year or 100-year, that's too far from what we have right now. And 5 or 3 years, it's too short. Like maybe when the book came out, it already 3 years passed. So I think 20 years is kind of reasonable and compromised time.
For sure. I'm going to take us to our next set of questions, trying to get a bit more in depth into the story. So my first one is going to take us a little bit back to Bitcoin. Listeners, you'll see why once I finish the question. So this is my second time reading Quantum Genocide. First time round, I read all of AI 2041. This time, I just specifically read this story and then also Kai-Fu's essay afterwards. And I guess it's always the same when you read something a second time or you watch something a second time, especially if you know that you need to sound smart talking about it on a podcast. You're going to read closely, you're going to catch new things. And the things I caught this time, I think you've already mentioned this a little bit, are the ghosts, people who are invisible, but they're still present, or they're dead, but they're still alive, or even things that aren't people, that are forces that don't have one single physical presence or body, but are still affecting and changing the world. Even something like climate change. But my favorite one in the story, I think, is it's this figure, Satoshi Nakamoto, who I think, although that name is Japanese, many people suspect Satoshi Nakamoto wasn't Japanese, and it's just a sort of a pseudonym. And I did not, I think I'd heard the name vaguely around Bitcoin, but I did not know before reading this book that one person is, I think, credited with the invention of Bitcoin. They go under this name, Satoshi Nakamoto, but no one really knows who that is. And he's vanished. I don't know. You might know more about this. In fact, no, you do know more about this than me. I don't know when he vanished, but at some point he did. And you've used this in the story. There's this legendary Bitcoin wallet that Satoshi left behind. No one knows where it is. And that's the sort of thing that kicks the story off. So that's one ghostly presence. So I guess two questions. One is, I'd just love to know more about your decision to use Satoshi in the story, but also two, were you deliberately trying to have this haunting presence in the story, or is that just sort of a side effect of talking about this kind of all present in the air kind of technology?
Yeah, I think first of all, I use Satoshi because it's a tribute to the one or the ones who invented the Bitcoin and everything afterward. And I think this kind of like plot device is a good kickoff because it almost feels like a treasure hunt for all those hackers. They try to get all the money out of this legendary wallet, but somehow it got hacked, like it got kidnapped by some even bigger force, some mysterious computation force. So this could be a very good kickoff point for the whole story. And second, I would say not only in Quantum Genocide, but like all over the book AI 2041, you can find a lot of ghost, spirits, mythology, dreams, and superstitious. So I do it intentionally. So because I think in the future, with the development of super advanced technology, actually the world will be seen as re-enchanted as before, like as thousands of years before, because the technology is so beyond our understanding, like our daily ordinary people's life. So it's almost like this kind of like AI in the black box. We know what it's capable of doing, but we don't know how exactly they're doing this. So this is almost like when our ancestors they witness everything in the nature and maybe some supernatural experience. They feel the same. They'll go to like refer everything to the god, to the spirit, to the ghost. And I think this is definitely something gonna happen right now and in the future. So we human beings, we have our own limitation. And I try to put all this kind of elements, even within different cultural background. So see how this like very traditional, maybe pre-modern thoughts and phenomenons coexist with the technology. So this is could be very interesting because right now we're using ChatGPT every day. So you might think, can AI dream? Do you have like hallucination and all this kind of things can be reproduced digitally? And of course, on certain level, they could for sure. And how this kind of interaction actually influence human beings actually. So because it's like very in-depth, embodiedly exchange all this kind of symbolic or linguistic information like every second. So basically it's reprogram our consciousness on certain level. So this is how I put it in a way like coexist of AI and human in the future. Of course, it will be in your dream. Of course, it will be some kind of ghost. And of course, it will be haunting you because it knows you so well and it knows what you fear, what you desire, and what you try to escape from. So this is what we imagine ghost, right? So and I try to like distribute all this kind of ideas in the book, so in a very, 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 very implicit way.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's lots of ways you could define a ghost. Definitely one way is some kind of an intelligence, but without a body, and a kind of intelligence that we can't understand. And that is, I guess, could also be a definition of AI. I think as far back as like the 90s and maybe even the 80s, people had thoughts, cultural expressions of those thoughts along those lines. The one that springs to my mind is Ghost in the Shell. But
Yep.
the Japanese, what was that first? A manga, then a anime film.
Mm-hmm.
But even the phrase, just the ghost in the machine, that could mean our soul in our body. It could just as easily mean the strange thing in cyberspace that we've created. I think that your choice to try and see how this could connect with the world's traditional cultures is, or deep historical cultures, is it's really interesting because it's not something I can think of having seen very often in stories. I guess in the versions of Ghost in the Shell I've seen, I've seen that because they sometimes have like I don't know, a robo geisha or something. So a very ancient piece of culture, but embodied in modern technology. But the reason I'm bringing this up actually is right in front of me, and I'm going to have to describe this for the listeners. I have two little figurines. My girlfriend gave both of them to me. One is a little model terracotta warrior, from Xi'an, one of those guys, a terracotta soldier, and the other is a little knitted android.
Android.
And they live right next to each other on my shelf.
Right.
So that's I guess a tiny example of
for sure.
These characters and creatures from like 20 years ago and hundreds and thousands of years ago.
Yep.
Side by side. Yeah. So I guess my next question, it's something we've already talked about, accelerationism. You've talked about how you do feel figures like that are forcing the world today. Do you think, I'll add another aspect to this question. Do you think people like that are here to stay? So like, for example, the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezos, do you think the influence of people like that is only going to grow as new technology like AI becomes more influential? Or do you think, I don't know, do you think that's just a phase? If you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think we're living in a transition age, like from Anthropocene to, I don't know how we call it, in James Lovelock's book, Novacene. So he imagined this kind of pure silicon-based civilization in the future. So I think we're right now in the very beginning of the transitioning. So I think, yeah, we are not fully prepared yet, because we are nothing very different from the caveman back in the 30,000 years ago. Our brain, our physical body, our emotion, our social relationships are not being changed a lot, but the technology, the environment has been changed like dramatically. So I think in the foreseeable future, we have to be very, very adapted in different ways. We might need to use robotic or synthetic biology to enhance our body. We need cognitive science to reprogram our consciousness and everything. So I think this is just the beginning of everything. And I think there's no way we could do it without technology. So I think the only way is how we gonna smartly embrace it. And of course, we need to reprogram the technology as well, because right now it's so capital driven. It's so much about like maximize the profits, and everything is like exploit all the data from your users and how to manipulate, how to get them addicted. And this is definitely not the way how we make ourselves better uh, as a species, as an individual, or as a civilization. So I think, yeah, we need further and more profound way of thinking about the relationship.
Excellent. Hopefully books like yours that slip in some creative fiction along with the essays. If maybe I'm being naive, but if the right people read the more challenging stuff, maybe
Yeah.
at least we can nudge, those stories can nudge the world a bit more in that direction.
Yeah, we're the dreamers.
Yeah, the dreamers. It sounds so cheesy, but I think there's some truth in it for sure.
Yep.
Just for my own benefit, or so I can add notes. Was the author that you just mentioned James Lovelock? Did you say?
Yes, James
And
Lovelock, a British scientist who invented the concept Gaia.
Gaia theory.
Gaia theory. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that one problem of writing something that predicts the future is writing a book takes quite a while. So you had that initial gap of starting writing the book or planning the book, then waiting until it hits the bookshelves and people are reading it.
Yep.
And then again, I guess there's another delay because it has to get translated into different languages to be fully disseminated. And now here we are in 2023. So the stories and the essays in AI 2041 are already not babies anymore. They're already a few years old. How do you feel they're aging? Do you think if you were to go back, would you tweak them at all? Or do you think it's all sort of rings true so far?
Yeah, interestingly, so because the technology develops so quickly, and I think like some of the technology we mentioned in the story had already out of date. For example, there's one story, the gods behind the mask. We talk about how to generate fake imageries and videos with GAN model, but now it's totally out of date. So because right now people using stable diffusion model, to generate like DALL-E and Midjourney and all these kind of tools. You can generate super fascinating imageries and even videos. So I think this is one example that there's no way you can catch up with the exact train. So otherwise, you just made up some very like fictional terms and very fancy novel concepts. So it make you like seems like it's more ambiguous, but it feels more futuristic. But from the other hand, I think the stories itself are representing some I would say like metaphorical reality, and that's not changed like as rapidly as technology. For example, the anxiety of equally treated as a person or as a kid in the educational system, like in an aging society, how we incentive people and to make contribution to the community, and how we're gonna to reimagine a new way of co-living with the machines or with the AIs, everything. So all these parts, they are, of course, they're about technology, but they are beyond technologies. They are also about like humanity. It's about the society. It's about the belief and the value system. So I think one good thing about writing science fiction is you can mix the all of those factors, and you can make up some like theories. You can make up some facts, and you don't have to be 100% accurate. And I think that's not the smartest way to do it. And I think, yep, of course, stories get aged, but I think some stories were like conquering the time. For example, 1984 and Brave New World, because I just reread those two stories, and also Handmaid's Tale. So because they are telling some kind of realities that might never get out of dated, and they talking about the eternity, essential part of humanity and our experience. So I think, yeah.
For sure. I think that's a really good way of looking at it, is that the stories that are relevant and powerful in the long term are ones that are maybe willing to look at the big picture or even be a little bit more crazy. They're not too focused on the specific troubles of our time. Just recently, my girlfriend and I watched the first episode of a British show called Years and Years, which I think was I want to watch more of it, but I was a little bit unimpressed with the first episode because it seemed very focused on taking all the things that were driving educated liberal people crazy at that time and just imagining what if those are the future. So we had a sort of a female equivalent figure of like an English Donald Trump played by Emma Thompson.
Right.
We had the US-China conflict in the South China Sea becomes the big scary geopolitical conflict. And there was one bit that just felt really stupid. It was one of the kids in one of the families. The parent, she's always wearing like a face filter over her face.
Yep.
And it's done in the same style as the Instagram filters that were popular that year. And already that feels totally irrelevant. It feels like my dad or even my granddad wrote that. It feels so dated. And the parents think the kid is going to come out as transgender, but the kid reveals that she is transhuman and that she wants to become merge with her like smartphone. And that felt really stupid because it was on one hand, they were totally fixated on things that they found annoying, not even scary, just annoying today. And then things that, if they are ever going to be a concern for humankind, like merging with machines, becoming immortal. You and me, Stan, I think we're going to be dead by the time that's an issue. It's
Yeah.
And it didn't really feel like it was going for anything deep. And if I could make a comparison to a similar film that did vibe with me a lot more, Don't Look Up, where in Don't Look Up you do have lots of American anxiety about the sort of anti-intellectual Trump era, but at the same time, the whole premise is that people just don't want to deal with something upsetting, climate change.
Right. Totally.
Which is that's how we live our lives, right? We don't think about the horrible future of climate change for the same reason we don't think about the fact we're all going to die one day, because it's too momentous to face, and it's all too easy for everyone to take the easy path. And even if in a future where climate change is solved, there'll probably be some other problem that we're not facing because we're not brave enough.
Right.
So yeah, these things I think are all around us in fiction, sci-fi especially. And you're right that some stuff ages better than others. So yeah, that thing about years and years, it's just been on my mind because I haven't found out if the next episode is going to be better. But that first one kind of frustrated me.
Give it a try.
Yeah, I like Emma Thompson anyway. She's always interesting to watch.
Yep.
But we shouldn't talk more about Emma Thompson. We should talk more about your book. So my final set of questions before the miscellaneous questions is about you and the other author, Kai-Fu Lee, which I think I'm curious about other readers who came to this book, because myself and everyone I know who read the book, I think they all knew you, because everyone who I know who read the book is a Chinese sci-fi fan or a sci-fi fan generally. But I know Kai-Fu Lee is quite famous in his own field. So I'm willing to bet there must be just as many people who maybe knew Kai-Fu but didn't know you. So that's, I don't know, that's a whole different question. But the question I wanted to ask you is, would a younger Chen Qiufan who was just starting out to becoming a writer, could you have ever imagined yourself writing a book like this and working with someone like Kai-Fu, or would that be impossible to predict, just like a sci-fi future?
I mean, not at all. So because back in the day, I was just a junior, employee in the company, and he's like the CEO, like the top of the top. So he's running everything. So I think, yeah, this is something totally like out of imagination. But I'm not saying I'm using all his fame or credibility, but I think we are changing each other, so to say, because he's so tech driven, he's very into his business world, but sometimes you can also see the limitation, on humanity, on this kind of like cultural thing. So I think we are really a good matchup, good team, because we can back up each other. So it makes the book even more interesting because people read it in different ways. Some people say, "Oh, I just want to read Kai-Fu's essay. I don't like science fiction at all." And some people say, "Okay, I love the stories, but I will skip the tech essay part." So maybe some people might find them like align with each other, but some people see this kind of misalignment. Like there are so many like conflicts in between the stories and the tech analysis. So I think this is also informative and interesting, because I think this is the right way to help people open up. They don't see technology and the human beings just like one very simple, naive relationship, but there's so many complicated factors and the atmospheres and the interactions in between. So this is how I see it holistically. it's a book like everyone might read it in different way. So this is our approach to it.
For sure. Yeah, I think I'm one of the readers that would not have picked up one of Kai-Fu's other books because it's just not what I read. And I've noticed that his style of writing is even a style of writing I don't encounter, because it's a very sort of straightforward style of English, and there's a lot of repetition of concepts that I don't encounter reading the kind of books I read, like Accelerate, Upgrade, all very positive, positive, and quite speedy, quite to the point, not going down in too many tangents, not too many fuzzy ideas, all very clear and sharp. And even if that's not, I'm not always comfortable with that. I'm okay. I'm comfortable with not being comfortable. I'm the sort of reader who tries to expand his mind, but would generally prefer just to explore my own little obsessions. So I think this is a nice sort of trick to pull on a reader like me, to make me face some other writing. And I think a thing I appreciated about reading Kai-Fu's take on AI is, like, this is a guy whose job is to know about AI and to know the facts, not to sort of speculate about it. As a guy who's from a humanities background, who's quite comfortable to stay there, I don't often get presented with straightforward facts from the world of business. And only recently in my last couple of jobs have I come into contact with, like, just sort of basic concepts from modern life sciences and biology. So it's maybe like eating my vegetables. I wouldn't go to it first. I'd rather eat the chocolate, but just being given this very straightforward, factual explanation of how these technologies work, what they might do, I think that's good mind expansion for me. It's not deep, complicated ideas. It's more straightforward. But yeah, I don't get a lot of that. So it was good, I think, to get some.
Yeah, and another thing to bear in mind is always more difficult to teach some science fiction fans to understand some technology compared with it's the other way around. It's always more difficult to teach some like tech, engineers, entrepreneurs to understand some humanity, some culture, belief, value system is also important in the system, rather than the other way around, like to teach some sci-fi fans knowing some technology, right? So considering the different portfolio of the audience, so of course, Dr. Kai-Fu Lee covering all this kind of like tech people, policy makers, like all these investors. So I think this is a good way to penetrate my ideas as from the humanity part perspective. We can penetrate a little bit of what we believe to their work. So this is making a little bit of change, not much, but step by step, maybe we are pushing the boundaries a little bit further. That's how I look at it.
Usually I don't want to say anything that simple and optimistic, but yeah, I agree. I think if those two worlds speak to one another, it should help matters, because yeah, I think both of us seem to agree the world of business around the world is really lacking a soul, but maybe the world of humanities is lacking a bit of the hard realism. So if the people in those two worlds can share their ideas and be forced to become a bit uncomfortable by going outside their box, I think it could help. To share another anecdote from my working world, so I'll try to not say anything that's violating any secrecy, but in my current job, quite a few people have quit for other jobs recently, because there are some we've had some problems in the workplace where employees aren't treated so well. And one thing everyone who's left has tried to do is communicate to the management, there are these problems, maybe you could be nicer to our colleagues. And one of the senior people in the company asked one of my colleagues who's leaving, like, why do you care? You've got a higher paying job. You're fine. Why do you care? And this guy who asked that, he's not a young man. He's not a stupid man, but I guess his education is all in business. The answer why someone would care about their fellow human beings should not be a difficult question I should have to explain to someone. But
Right.
yeah, it's almost shocking that he wouldn't think about that. But if his education in the world of finance and business didn't tackle these sorts of questions, maybe it should.
Yeah, that's the most scary part of our education, it's not to teach like how we think as a human being, but to think and like performance like a machine. So
Right.
you have to cut off your human parts. That's the most scary part to me.
Yeah, it's a machine that is a self-contained unit that just tries
Yep.
to maximize its own potential, which is ironic because that's not even what machines do. Machines aren't selfish.
Yeah, it's called objective function optimization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, trying to maximize my functions every day. So my second question about teamwork with Kai-Fu was, we already kind of got into this, but did
Yep.
you feel a need to challenge Kai-Fu's ideas, or were you trying to add something on top of them, synthesize with them? Like how did you think about your ideas in relation to his?
Yeah, so basically, he's the one who will like set up this kind of roadmap, like how technology gonna evolve over the next 20 years. And I'll use my imagination to put it into different kind of like cultural background or story lines and characters, and maybe using the speculation to push it a little bit further. And he might tell me, oh, this is not gonna be possible in 2041, and this might not look very accurate, and he might like add up some more details technologically and something like that. But I think ultimately we're changing each other a little bit, and he gonna becoming more open up to my ideas. And I just keep telling him, okay, like fiction is fiction. It's not like a project management. It's not like something you can plan from A to B to C to D. So there's something always happening, something just might out of surprise, and something you might not like, but we have to, accept it because there are 10 stories in the book. You might like maybe 7 out of 10, but maybe there's one or two you might be not you might not be a fan, but it could be very successful like among different group of readers. So like for example, my haunting idol, so he very against that kind of story because it's like a very otaku kind of story. It's about Japan. It's about metaverse detective game. It's kind of like very teenager, but to giving a little bit of the spoiler right now, it's gonna be adapted into a TV series by a
Oh, cool.
very very big studio. So it's gonna happen. So I think, yeah, so you have to have this kind of diversity in the book, and you have to embrace and open up to different kind of like style and tones and things like that. So I think it's quite a journey, and I think we're quite happy on what we've been working on and what's the outcome. And I think and we all gain a lot from this book.
I'm not surprised it's things like the process of creative writing or questions of taste about what's good and what's bad that are
Totally.
a little tricky for Kai-Fu, because those are not
Mm-hmm.
things you can quantify. You can't put a number on a
Right.
genre, and you can't.
Right.
And you, I mean, I don't do creative writing every day, but I do a lot of writing, creative and more like my last job, writing articles. And whether, for me anyway, whether it's fiction or whether it's nonfiction, you can't predict what is going to come out. You can, for me anyway, especially writing stories, it is not a completely rational process. I don't know where it all comes from. There is some element of mystery in there. There's always surprises, and the rational stuff comes at the start when you plan it, and then at the maybe the second half where you edit it. But even editing, I think for me, is not totally rational. It's doing things before I can understand what I'm doing, using instincts.
It's the most beautiful part of it. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. Gosh, what was I going to say? Something about my hunting idol. Yeah, I guess two little things, not really questions, just comments I wanted to make. One is that I think including a story like My Haunting Idol about otakus, so like shut-in nerds and very like young teenagers, feels totally appropriate for any story about digital technology, because the younger generations are the greatest digital natives. Like a comparison I always tell my friends is, I grew up, I was introduced to my dad's Windows 95 computer when I was like probably 4 or 5 years old, so in like 97 or 98. He showed me how to play basic games, and then like maybe in the year 1999 or 2000 I got shown the internet. But compare that, I have a little sister who's going to be 16, or no, she's already 16 in January, and she grew up like as a tiny kid with a smartphone tablet. That, and the generations coming after her, or kids 10 years younger than her, are going to be growing up with even stranger or even more powerful artificial intelligence technologies. And so it would be silly not to have some stories about young kids, even if those young kids are kind of silly themselves. Definitely my most interesting experiences with technology were like as a teenager using MSN Messenger. It was really formative stuff, and it all happened on a screen. It didn't really happen in the real world. And the other thing I wanted to say is, I think a really good thing, I don't know how much it was you, how much it was Kai-Fu did, but in your stories you set them all over the world. And so some in China, or like you said, they're Japan, others in Western countries, but then there's others in places you often wouldn't read. You wouldn't find many sci-fi stories set in. So there's one in Africa, in, trying to remember the country. Oh, I've forgotten. Was it Nigeria? Nigeria.
Yep.
And we had another one in India. And I think that was great. I found in my last job, the pharma industry magazine, it can be quite hard to find big business people who want to talk about these developing countries, and it's simply because they're smaller markets. There's not as much business to do there. But obviously, if we're looking at the future, those could be the markets of the future. So it would be silly, even from a business perspective, not to talk about them. Sure. So as a reader, I just really appreciated that we were getting a global picture that definitely did not ignore the world's richest countries, but did not give them all the attention. I think that's good, and I'd love to see more of that as a reader.
Great.
I'm not going to push you to tell me more about that though, because we should keep moving. Sure. My next set of questions is the miscellaneous ones, the silly fun ones, and the first of those miscellaneous questions is, if you could pick a Chinese word of the day for this episode, so something that captures the spirit of Quantum Genocide, what would it be?
I think it would be something like 缠绕, entanglement, something like that. But it also means like haunting,
Oh.
You 缠, it means entangle. I can send you the Chinese character.
That would be great.
So it's like, it means quantum entanglement, but also it means haunting by ghost. So 你被鬼缠上了, you are haunted by ghost. You are using also the same character in Chinese.
That's amazing.
I can send you now. Yep.
Okay, so haunt, or to be haunted. / To Be Entangled.
Yep.
That is an amazing combination. And I am willing to bet I do not recognize this character, so thank you so much for sending it. Yeah, hopefully I will remember that one, but we'll see. And it's also, quantum particles entangle as well. So It's got that too. Perfect. Okay, the next silly question is the musical pairings. So I know for a fact you've got one very prepared. I can see it here in the notes. So if you were gonna set this story, if this was going to be turned into a film, into an exciting thriller, and you were making the soundtrack, what's the song that you'd pick as like the theme tune?
Yeah, I'll pick a little bit ambient and a little bit electronic one. It's Emerald Rush from John Hopkins from the album Singularity, to also make it a perfect match.
I listened to this one before the show started, and I think I already said to Qiufan it's got a really cool music video. What I didn't say is, at least I guess I don't listen to a lot of electronic music, especially not electronic music that has like a repetitive club beat that's good for dancing to, because I'm such a bad dancer. If I'm listening to electronic music, I guess I'm looking for something probably that is a bit more like a rock song that has a verse chorus or something. But this one, it felt like it was building and building and building, and it had me really I was really enjoying it. It was really beautiful, but it was a little scary and a little tense as well. It always felt like it was building up to something, and I don't know if that's an exact mirror of the plot of Quantum Genocide, but Quantum Genocide is definitely it's a very highly strung story, really tense, and it does build to a crazy climax. I think I won't spoil exactly how it ends, but suffice to say, where it takes you is a whole different situation than what you've been going through, which I guess is maybe a point about accelerationism. The exponential multiplying technology could produce something that looks nothing like the starting point. Yeah, and it could produce something infinitely better or infinitely worse. My own musical pairing I've picked is also electronic music. I literally do not know what subgenre you would call this, because I know nothing about electronic music, but I know I absolutely love this track, and I love it because it's at least for me, it's kind of a scary one. So it's called Spray. It's by a musician called Face, Phace, and to me this one sounds like some kind of evil machine waking up, activating and speeding up. I know that's kind of a cliche in sci-fi now, is the idea of like a Skynet type technology that becomes self-aware. I know another sort of cliche is the idea of a singularity, a technology that can multiply its own development so that it goes totally exponential and overtakes mankind. That's not totally what Quantum Genocide is about, because the AI and the technology has sort of a project with a defined endpoint. So I guess spoilers, close your ears, listeners, if you don't want to hear this. Marc Rousseau, the villain, the evil scientist, dies or commits suicide about what,
Great choice.
2/3 or halfway through the story. But his plan keeps on going, and it's being driven by technology that doesn't appear to have a central brain. It's distributed all around the world with moving parts that can't be tracked, and nobody can stop it. And to me, the song Spray, it sounds to me like there's some force that can't be stopped. So that's why I picked it. And that's my TED talk. Okay, next miscellaneous question. This is the one I snip out and put on the show's Patreon feed, and it's this. So before I read any of your stuff, Qiufan, I remember hearing comparisons of you with an author called William Gibson, and I didn't actually know who that was. I found out later he wrote Neuromancer, which I had heard of, but didn't really know what it was. Then I learned that's sort of it's considered the most cyberpunk novel that exists, or the one that started that subgenre. So I I understood people were using that comparison to say Chen Qiufan is a cyberpunk writer. But I know often authors don't really like these comparisons that compare them to one other author. So I wanted to ask you, because I'm not clear on this, is William Gibson a really big influence on you, or even the biggest? Or is that just sort of a convenient comparison that book reviewers and marketers like to make? Okay, I'll close off the bonus question there, and I'll take us to the final questions, the further reading questions. First one's this: if listeners want more books like AI 2041, where would you send them?
I would say like the 12 Tomorrows series from MIT Press. So usually it's like an anthology from different science fiction writers, and in January they're like curating the anthology around one specific topic, like mostly like hot sci-fi or very tech-driven sci-fi. So they have, I think they're like 3 or 4 books for now. And the very latest one was The Life in Anthropocene, came out last year. So I highly recommend it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm trying to think if there's other things I've read I would send listeners to. Probably the simple one is go read some more Chen Qiufan if you haven't already. If you read
great.
this one, I think if a reader read Quantum Genocide and they like the sort of multifaceted chaos, then maybe Waste Tide might be up their alley. I think there's some similarities there.
Thank you.
So yeah, that's all right. And if listeners, if you haven't heard it already, do consider going back and listening to the other Chen Qiufan episodes on the story on this podcast. There's the one where Stan was here as the guest on Waste Tide, but there's also been, definitely one other with Francesco Verso, who has published Qiufan stories in Italian translation, and we talked about Coming of the Light, which is I guess that one we didn't really get into the whole world of Silicon Valley or the Chinese equivalent of Silicon Valley culture and how that links up with ideas about accelerationism. But that story has that, and it also explores ways that Buddhism could either inform technology. Well, I think 2 things: how it could inform technology, or how Buddhist concepts could inform like the deeper ideas behind the fiction. And if speaking of crazy, you mentioned earlier, Qiufan, kind of crazy pathological pattern recognition. I think when I tried to analyze that story, that's what happened to me. I think I probably started foaming at the mouth laying out my analysis of that story, because I thought I had unlocked the secret hidden truth of the story, but probably I was just coming across as slightly obsessive and insane. But I really like that story, and I hope it shows in that episode. So listeners, do check those out. Oh yeah, there was the other one. I forgot the other one. Another story I love. Oh dear, I've forgotten the name though. It's the one that appears in the Book of Shanghai.
Oh, the State of Trance?
State of trance. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's relevant to AI because that has some natural language processing AI generated text in it. Is that right?
Yep.
Based on your writing.
Yep.
So you were totally ahead of the curve on that one.
I really am.
Right. Final question. What are you reading just now?
I'm currently reading Benjamin Labato's When We Cease to Understand the World. It's a really weird book that there are 6 stories in there, like you couldn't tell it's fictional or it's non-fictional because it's talk about all these big names, Schrödinger, all these like famous physics scientists back in the history and a very specific period of time in their life, but there's something fictional in his writings, so it's almost like mysterious, explore where is the boundary of facts and imagination. So this is the book I'm reading right now. It's pretty thought-provoking and it's really inspiring.
That sounds great. Yeah, it's fantastic when a writer is able to like use the essay format but bring in something creative and extra. I know there is one book I've read that is an amazing example of that, but what it is, I cannot remember. So whatever, I'll just stand by my words there. The book I'm reading right now, I'm almost afraid to say it because it's such a controversial, weird book. I'm reading Lolita by Nabokov, Vladimir Nabokov, and I don't know, it's one so many people told me was amazing, but I avoided it because it's such an uncomfortable topic.
I know,
but it's some of the best writing I've read in a long time. And I think, what can I say? So many of the books I read for this podcast, and they're translated. And although the translators do amazing work, I feel like occasionally I'll read a book in my own first language, English, that has just the writer has such an amazing command of language that it does things translated fiction just usually don't do. I know that sounds really mean to say that, but yeah, that just the quality of the language in that book blows me away. But there's there's almost nothing I can do to connect of that book with Quantum Genocide. But I just wanted to say it's that's what I'm reading, and it's totally crazy and messed up, but some of the best books are. So yeah, that's the lot really. The last thing for me to say is thank you so much for coming on the show, Qiufan. It's been a pleasure having you back on again, and was a very different conversation this time around, I think, but just as fun.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Angus, and hopefully can see you again very soon in person.
That would be cool. Yeah. And we've reached the end of the show. So there's not much for me to say really, just the plugs, the usual stuff. So if you want to follow this show on social media, there is a Discord that you can join. There's a link in the show notes for that. I'm on Instagram, or rather the podcast is on Instagram at TrChFic, TrChFic. I myself am on Twitter at Angus Likes Words. You can support the show and get well over 100 episodes on our Patreon, patreon.com/TrChFic. And if you've not checked out the podcast homepage yet at TrChFic.com, TrChFic, I heartily recommend you do that. There's lots of cool stuff up there. That's it for me. No more jabbering on, no more prattle, just silence. Silence with which you can use to meditate upon the threat of quantum computing. And of course, I almost forgot, but the most important thing you can do to help this show is tell people. Tell your friend, tell your teacher, and tell your Bitcoin account manager. And until next episode, the crickets will say bye-bye, and I will say 再见.